Welcome back to U.S. History. Today, we're learning about Chapter 3. Let's get into it. All right, Chapter 3. Today, we're learning about the first English colonies, Roanoke and Jamestown. Of the two, Jamestown will be more important. So what's the difference between them? Roanoke is the first colony, but it fails. And then Jamestown is the first permanent colony. So if you Google first colony, you'll get Jamestown. But the real first colony is Roanoke. Okay? We'll talk about John Smith. He's going to help the colony survive. They're going to have a time called starving time. That doesn't sound like a good time to me. We'll find out. Then we get the Plymouth colony, the Pilgrims, first Thanksgiving. All right? And I don't know if you remember this, but the Native Americans will teach the Pilgrims how to catch and eat eels. So don't forget eel with your turkey. Okay? And then we're going to get into government, and that is the Mayflower Compact and the House of Burghers. House of Burgesses. But if you remember it as House of Burghers, that's fine too, as long as you remember it. So let's get going. Your objectives. What's the first English colony? Roanoke. Good job. What's the first permanent English colony? Jamestown. Fantastic. How's life in Jamestown? It's gonna be very difficult. But you need to know why it's difficult. We'll get into it more than just that, okay? And then give examples of early government in North America, House of Burghers, Burgesses, and the Mayflower Compact. I hope that is a mnemonic and that helps you remember. It doesn't warp your thinking. You're like, yes, they had the House of Burghers. Anyhow, it's the House of Burgesses. Okay? Know what the colony is. Know who John Smith was. Understand the formation of governments. Let's rock. Okay, lost colony of Roanoke. They come over. They're struggling. The boat goes back to England for supplies. Hey, we'll see you guys in 6 months or something like that. They don't come back for years. When they come back, the colony's gone. And in the tree is carved the word Croatan. What happened to the colony? Did they A, get destroyed and wiped out by the Native Americans? B, get destroyed and wiped out on their own power because they couldn't, grow enough food and they just withered away? Or did they assimilate into the Native American tribe to say, hey, man, let's join the winning team? We don't really know the answer. But if you remember reading in your Jamestown primary source, they saw the one kid with the blonde hair, and they thought that might be a descendant of someone from Roanoke. So we don't really know what happened to them. That's why they're lost. Check out this. What's a charter? You go to a charter school. What's a charter? It's a document that grants you permission. Okay, so for the charter school, you get a document that says you can have a school. For a charter here, you can have a document that grants you the right to form a colony. Does that make sense? So that's a simple little vocab word. Now we're going to talk about Jamestown, and it's named after King James. Okay, so this is 1607. I have to look it up. I'm going with 25 years. 25 years after Roanoke? Okay, so there's the answer. Location. They sail into the bay and they pick a spot that they think is going to be awesome to have this colony. They thought wrong. Wrong answer, because it's all this sludgy water, and then when the tide changes, it's all salty. It's never good. It's always got bugs in it. It's just, you have bad water, you're going to have a bad time. Here's something else. They're going to go look for gold. So you have all this time to do stuff. Well, what you should be doing is growing crops, because you can eat crops. What you can't eat is gold. They don't find it anyway, but even if you found it, you can't eat it. And so they spend all their time with gold fever and trying to get rich and figure out a way to make money instead of spending their time growing food. We'll talk about why that's bad coming up next. Okay, note, this is 100 years after Columbus. When Columbus sails in, obviously he doesn't sail into Virginia, but when the Spanish explorers first show up, the Native Americans are like, in awe, and who are these people? What are these boats? This is 100 years later. everybody knows what's going on. Some of the Native Americans have even been to England, okay? So the surprise is over, and I just want you to understand that this is 100 years after Columbus, okay? Here's Powhatan, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. It's both a tribe of people and a leader. His real proper name is down there, it starts with a W. I'm not even going to attempt it, but they're going to interact with the people of Jamestown. And you read that in the primary source. Sometimes it seems like they're friends and they're eating together. Other times they're going to attack each other and things like that. So just know that the relationship is complicated. Here's a video about Jamestown.
To get by ship from England to Jamestown in 1607, you have to traverse more than 3,000 miles of the worst ocean in the world, the North Atlantic, in a really small wooden vessel, terribly cramped, terribly crowded, eating salt or spoiled food, drinking water with creatures in it. And what's even more remarkable is at the end of the journey, you're going to find yourself in an unknown territory, stretching unknown distances in every direction except the ocean. And there's the ocean between you and home. It's an extraordinary risk to just make the leap into the unknown and plant yourself there.
Ultimately, the goal simply was survival. This was a wilderness, to put it mildly. The living conditions couldn't possibly have been worse. And there were Native Americans living here who appeared to be the enemy, and everybody was trying to kill each other. That colony barely survived.
When the first settlers reached the shores of North America, in Virginia, in Massachusetts, the thing that struck them was the effectively unlimited extent of natural resources. They knew that the forests went back as far as anyone had ever been. They knew that there were fish in the rivers. They knew that there was enough land for generation after generation after generation of farmers. The mindset changed on the moment that the English colonists landed in America. Until then, natural resources were a restraint. Now, natural resources were a liberation.
The next thing you have to know about Jamestown is more people keep coming over. And the ones who come over later know something that the first ones didn't know, and that is that almost half of them are likely to die from local diseases to which they are not acclimated, and from other things, their own bad food, their own bad sanitation, and ultimately hostility from the Indians, whom they've antagonized by their presence. And yet people do keep coming.
They were either fleeing religious persecution, they were fleeing poverty, they were fleeing a ceiling that said if you're not an aristocrat, you can't rise. And so there's a real sense of greater freedom here than anywhere else in the world. And a freedom that's not just political, but it's also a freedom to become somebody, a freedom to rise, a freedom to acquire property in a way that did not exist in the more structured and medieval societies around the world.
Welcome back. So the colony is looking like it's gonna fail. People are starving. In comes John Smith, okay? He who works not, eats not. He says it's time to get to work. It's time to grow the food.
To the colonists, the ships arriving in August 1609 seemed to be a godsend.
6 battered and broken ships reached Jamestown.
On one of those ships was the young girl.
Relations with the Powhatan Indians deteriorate quickly.
The English really depended on the Powhatans for food supplies, but the Powhatan had decided that enough was enough. With the spread of English settlement, they no longer wanted to support the English, they wanted to get rid of them. And so in the fall of 1609, they attacked and they lay siege to Jamestown.
The settlers are trapped. The Powhatans kill anyone who ventures outside the fort.
For those inside the fort, death awaits them outside the walls. This same fort that was supposed to protect them from the Spanish and from the Powhatan has now become a coffin. And the people inside are feeling hunger, they're feeling the stress, they're starting to break down. There's sickness and starvation. By November, they're completely out of food.
All of us at Jamestown began to feel the sharp prick of hunger. which no man truly described. But he who had tasted the bitterness thereof, a world of miseries ensued.
And there's also disease. And we know today what's causing that disease. The wells are polluted with E. coli. There's things in this water that are going to kill people.
The water contains not only deadly bacteria, but also traces of arsenic. It's poisonous.
Bad water conditions, disease swept through the colonists.
300 individuals confined to the fort, many of them sick. We know that some had the plague when they arrived.
How's he doing?
He has fever.
Jane finds herself in a living nightmare. According to the historical records, the settlers are beginning to eat anything.
Having fed upon our horses and other beasts as long as they lasted, we were glad to make the shift with vermin, as well as dogs, cats, rats, and mice.
They have no prospects of food. There's nothing to eat. So the monster of hunger is loose.
Most of the people in Jamestown do not survive.
You're talking about a siege, you're talking about fractured leadership, you're talking about a lack of purpose, you're talking about all the conditions where civilization or the veneer thereof breaks down.
Okay, worth talking about here is Pocahontas. I have a confession. I've never seen the Disney cartoon. I know, I'm sorry. Students have told me that she marries John Smith or something like that. No. She marries John Rolfe. Okay. Now, in the book, John Smith writes that she saved his life, and so there's probably some type of embellishment. Let me tell you the history about this. Little girls, little kids in general, were not welcomed in the tribal council. So the fact that she was there, maybe not. But if she was there, it might have been a ploy like, hey, look, I'm going to chop this guy's head off. You run out there and save him. And then that'll kind of scare him into thinking, all right, we need to behave. Does that make sense? So John Smith is there at the tribal council, and Powhatan's like, that's it, man, you're out of here. And then his daughter saves him. And it could have been a setup is what I'm trying to say. Or it could have not happened at all. We don't really know. But from his book, it happened. That's what's going on. You can read more about it if you want. I put later, sorry for the inaccuracy. There's no American flag at this time, but I needed a boat picture, okay? They pack up at Jamestown. They burn down the buildings. They say, we're out of here. This place is not good. And they're leaving. But as they leave, what do they find? Boats coming this way saying, nope, you ain't going back to England. Get back there and reestablish Jamestown. So Jamestown looks like it's going to fail. It doesn't. Let's talk about King James. Oh, the other King James. Sorry about that. Okay, let's read what he says here in this quote. A custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, dangerous to the lungs, and in the black stinking fume thereof, nearest resembling the horrible Stygian smoke of the pit that is bottomless. What is King James talking about? Take a second, pause the video, read it again. What is the king talking about? Tobacco, okay? This is what saves the colony. There was no gold, but there's tobacco. This is now the gold that they're looking for. This is you can get rich, okay? In Europe, people start smoking. In Virginia, people start growing tobacco. This saves the colony, but this also is going to require more labor. And now you're going to get indentured servants and in a minute slaves coming over. Let's talk about it. How does farming tobacco impact the relationship with the Native Americans? You did, before tobacco, you had to get along with the Native Americans in some way. You had to trade with them, you had to hunt with them, something along those lines. You couldn't be 100% adversarial because you needed them to survive. Now you don't need them, okay? Now, and the other thing is, these farms to grow tobacco, not only do you not need their help, but you do need their land. So these farms, these tobacco farms, will make it where the English settlers can be self-sufficient and make money, and they don't need help as much anymore. They can buy supplies if they don't have them, and they also need the Native Americans' land. Suddenly they're going to start spreading out. Okay, so tobacco in Jamestown, it's a big deal. House of Burgesses, this establishes the concept of representative government. We're going to have people saying, I get to vote or I get a say. This is part of becoming that American ethos. Why do we believe everyone should have a say in government? This goes all the way back 100 years, 150 years before there was America. Okay, we have a representative government. In addition, about it next time, I'm not sure, but I do want to mention the Mayflower Compact. When the Pilgrims come over, they're coming over for religious reasons. But they're not the only people on the Mayflower. There are non-religious people there too. And so the Mayflower Compact is a link, or let me rephrase that, is an agreement between religious and non-religious people on a government that governs them both. That's also part of the American ethos, that you can have freedom of religion or freedom from religion, and that'll be codified in the Bill of Rights, okay? So that goes back to the Mayflower Compact. What are the two founding governments in North America in the colonies? House of Burgesses, Mayflower Compact. Feel good? Okay, cool. Now let's talk about this. The first African American slaves in North America. Okay, this happens in 1619. They are on their way to Mexico. I believe it's Veracruz. And there's about 350 people on board, and their boat is attacked by pirates. The pirates capture 30 African Americans and then bring them to Jamestown. So that is the origin of African slavery in North America. Now, are these the first slaves in North America? No. 100 years before that, the Spanish were enslaving the Native Americans. Were those the first slaves in North America? No, because 100 to 500 years before that, the Aztecs were enslaving Native Americans. So I just want to put that in historical context. We sometimes forget how the Native Americans were treated by the Europeans or by other Native Americans, and I want to make sure that I put that in there as well. So why are these slaves needed in Virginia? The tobacco, okay? And that's going to be a theme that we'll see later with cotton. When you have a crop that demands labor, then you're going to increase the value of slavery. You're going to increase the number of slaves, okay? What was the first English colony? Roanoke. First permanent English colony? Jamestown. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Coming up next, chapter 3.5. I'll see you there.